Hello everyone and welcome to our Civil Service Data Survey webinar. I'm Vicki Chauhan. I am Head of Public Sector here at NTT Data UK, and for today's webinar I'm joined by Bill Wilson, who is Head of Data Intelligence Solutions, and also Simon Driscoll, who is Head of Data Consulting. We're on the line for the next 45 minutes and we're going to be talking specifically about data. And specifically, we're going to be exploring the results of the recent survey we conducted across the civil service, exploring your views on the use of data in government. There is going to be the opportunity for some questions and answers towards the end of the session, so please do feel free to enter any questions you've got as we go along in the Ask Questions section at the top right-hand corner of your screens. And at the very end of the session, you will all receive a personal copy of the full survey results. So don't worry too much about needing to take notes as we go along. You'll have the survey results after the session. So let me start by telling you a little bit more about why we commissioned the survey in the first place. NTT Data is a digital data and technology solutions business, and underpinning the work that we do is a public service ethos. We have a genuine commitment to improving the lives of citizens in the UK and also helping the civil servants who serve the public. Data's in our blood and in our name, and to help inform the services that we design and deliver for you as our clients, we wanted to understand a bit more about how you want to use data, how you think data is being used across government, and what actions we can take to hasten the progress of data across government. And all of that really with two aims in mind. Firstly, to give you a set of evidence and statistics to help with your own thinking and planning on the use of data. And secondly, to help our own people go the extra mile to help you. So the survey itself was run just before Christmas. It lasted for 5 weeks and we had about 350 responses from across quite a broad spectrum of the civil service. And before I ask Bill to take us through some of the findings from the survey, can I just say a big thank you to everyone who took the time to complete our survey. For every survey completed, we made a small donation to charity, and thanks to your efforts, we raised nearly £2,000 for NHS charities together. So thanks very much for that. OK, so Bill, as Les Dennis would say, let's see what our survey says. Bill.
Well, good morning, everyone. Vicki introduced me at the start. I'm Bill Wilson, Head of Data and Intelligence Solutions at NTT Data in the UK. Now, our survey collected a lot of data, and as we're limited on time this morning, I'll be taking you through a few of the key highlights and then discussing the implications of the survey results. As Vicki mentioned, do put any questions in the Ask a Question box section as we go, and we'll try and answer them at the end. So as Chris Switty might say, can we have the next slide, please? So here we have 5 key points that emerge from the mass of data we collected. First of all, respondents were drawn from across government, but with a bias towards senior leadership. Second, priorities for use of data in government somewhat depended on people's job roles. Third, looking at the as-is data maturity of departments, they tend to be stronger on governance and standards and comparatively weaker on technology issues. Fourth, thinking about what needs to happen in the future, we need to strengthen what exists, but leadership and workforce skills will be crucial. And finally, the centre of the government is supported as an enabler, but there's slightly less consensus on whether it should actually have more teeth. Well, we'll take each one of these one at a time. Let's look first at the distribution of those who responded. And the first thing to say is that we heard disproportionately from leaders in the civil service. 48% of respondents were drawn from the top 13% of the civil service in terms of seniority. Now, this shows there's an interest in data challenges and opportunities at a senior level in government. And this wasn't a survey of those setting the agenda at the central government either. Only 3% of respondents worked at the Treasury or the Cabinet Office. And actually, only 5% of respondents were in digital data or technology roles. So the bulk of people who responded to this survey were in operational delivery, policy and project delivery in the major departments of state. So our survey didn't just reach those with a specialist interest. It's just possible that data and analytics is finally becoming an acceptable conversation topic at dinner parties when we get to have those again. Now, it'd be surprising in a self-selecting survey about data if there was poor support for the question, how important is this agenda? But 93% of respondents chose very important or absolutely essential, which is a great start. But what's more interesting is their goals in making better use of data. And in this part of the survey, the priorities tended to differ depending on job role. But overall, the top goals were as follows: collating and analysing data to support evidence-based policy making, using data to target services at the point of greatest need, improving impact and reducing waste, providing a single point of access to multiple public services and supporting data sharing between them, and assessing the impact of public spending and services supporting better evaluation of policy and service delivery. Now, this split nicely shows the balance of priorities for using data in supporting two broad areas: policy development and improving the operational effectiveness and efficiency of public services. Well, let's do a split for more junior members of staff to take an example of a specific group. Now here, using data to personalise the delivery of services and identifying fraud, error and waste were also critical priorities. Well, if the measure of a department's data maturity is awareness of the departmental data strategy, then things don't look too rosy. Only 40% of respondents were certain that there was a published data strategy. Now, I know that the prevalence of data strategies is greater than that, which suggests that us data professionals need to be more effective at communicating our message across government. Now, the survey revealed a bit more nuance when we asked about maturity in certain particular areas. Of the four capabilities we asked about, active data governance was seen as the furthest ahead, with 16% of respondents suggesting there was no activity in this field, just 16%. Progress with a data management framework, providing visibility on data sets quality, provenance and handling, scored similarly, as you can see. The use of common data standards governing language, definitions and formats, permitting the sharing, linking and comparison of data sets was comparatively immature, with just over 40% of those questions stating that progress was at an early stage or even non-existent. And technology was the weakest area, with less than half of the respondents suggesting there was even a firm plan in place for a widely available data management platform. And by that, we mean a platform that could allow self-service access to an analysis of departmental and cross-government data. I think I know a team who could plug a few gaps there. Now, 12% of respondents worked at HMRC, and the maturity there was felt to be greater. But their numbers are inside the chart you can see here, which puts the level of maturity in other departments even lower than the averages presented here. So on the whole, these results suggest that civil servants are realistic about how far there is still to go in the use of data, both for policy purposes and for frontline service delivery. And in terms of where the greatest focus needs to be going forward, there was a more diverse set of opinions than on other questions. But 55% supported strong and visible leadership on data, supported by an active data strategy. Second was introducing common standards governing language, definition and formats, permitting the sharing and comparison of data sets. The full text around the third priority was establishment of a data management platform, providing visibility on data sets quality, provenance and handling. Fourth was increasing the size and developing the skills of your permanent digital and specialist workforce. And fifth was strengthening of data governance through an established network of identified individuals able to oversee and improve the use of data across the organisation. So leadership and the data skills of the permanent workforce were in the top four priorities, and I'll come back to those later. Now, by comparing some of the answers to the as is, we see that weaker areas currently, such as common standards, need to be enhanced. And areas that were felt to be progressing at the moment need to continue to be priorities. So that includes things like a data management framework and active data governance. But we're going to look finally at the role of the centre. And the first finding is strong support for central action, which kind of makes sense when you consider that good data sharing and technical integration starts with common standards, formats, and a level of common governance. And of course, all of these benefit from central coordination. The skills issue was raised again with 80% of respondents backing the establishment of better training and professional development for data professionals. A cross-government data platform was mentioned, once again highlighting the need for effective technology solutions. And the next four priorities, as you can see, for central action were legislative changes to support more data sharing across government, the creation of data standards for use by departments, along with a framework requiring their application to new and key data sets. And this kind of reflects the priorities we saw in the previous two topics. The next one was more clarity and communication concerning the legislative constraints on cross-departmental data sharing. And finally, more public communications work to explain and demonstrate how improved use of government data could improve citizens' lives. Now, of course, the more effective the integrated data platform for government proposed in the National Data Strategy becomes, the more important it will be for government to address that last priority shown here, that of explaining to sometimes a sceptical public why linking data sets is essential. So while there was plenty of support for many of the actions central government could take, the question of whether the centre should have more additional levers to promote departmental compliance with central data strategies, policies and standards received support from 53% of respondents, and a further 1/3 didn't know. Well, I guess that's a good starting point as we wait to see what the new Central Digital and Data Office will announce. Now, all the answers you see here are themes from the National Data Strategy, validating the focus areas for that publication. Mind you, of course, the National Data Strategy is a bit of a tome to anyone who's read it. I worked out last night that it's actually half the length of the Old Testament. If only a DCMS were equally infallible. Now, my last graph is a bit of fun. Because we captured the time of day when people completed the survey, we could make a few guesses about the working day of the average civil servant. So you can see at the start, we have a few very keen people who like to start their day with a data survey. They're my kind of people. We have a few people who fill the survey in during the morning tea break. However, you probably know caffeine kicks in after about 60 minutes, which explains a burst of frantic work and a drop in survey responses in the hour running up to 12 noon. Lots of people filled in the survey during the lunch break and early afternoon. And as you can see here, there are a few night owls and a long trail of insomniacs. So if you want to cold call a civil servant, this is some pretty interesting data. Now, there's a lot more depth in our report and serious analysis. So if you want to know more, I'd urge you to read the PDF that you'll be sent after this webinar, or better still, analyse the data for yourself. So we want to practice what we preach on open data. So we've published a data set using the Web CSV data standard advocated by the Government's Data Standards Authority. So now we have just a few minutes to step back from the data and ask some broader questions. So the first one I asked myself is, are there any surprises here? For me, it was not so much in the answers, but the fact that so many civil servants took the time to complete the survey to express their views that we can actually make statistically significant statements about data in national government. And that's hugely encouraging. It's often hard graft working through the challenges of using data more effectively in the civil service. So the pleasant surprise is that outside the community of data specialists, people actually care about this stuff and are expecting more. Culture change is such a massive hurdle to better use of data in any organisation. So the 60% of respondents who thought that this agenda was absolutely vital will, I trust, become agents of change. The second surprise is the level of support for more action by the centre, with more than 50% of respondents agreeing that central action would hasten progress across quite a wide range of different measures that we suggested in our survey. But the same four themes come out from a number of the answers. First of all, the importance of leadership and strategy, the need to close the data skills gap, clear standards and less red tape for interoperability, and technology platforms for improved data sharing and data exploitation. And it's easy to see how these priorities all support each other. So, for example, one respondent commented on the skills in their department, saying that the opportunity was to drive a Ferrari, but the department's ability was to ride a bicycle. So if a company like NTT DATA delivers a technology capability of a sports car, but no one can drive it, then the result is a failure. Actually, that's quite a bad analogy for any technology solution, because Ferraris are notoriously unreliable, they're fiddly to repair, they have a poor carbon footprint, and attract quite a lot of unwarranted attention from malicious actors. Anyway, let's get back to our four themes. And the problem of standards and interoperability will, I think, be familiar to many people joining the call this morning. So let me instead address the topic of leadership. Now, we don't know the underlying reasons why so many respondents thought that leadership was crucial, but let me leave you with some reasons to believe, as I do, that it is. Now, first of all, with the right leadership, data will be considered in every new initiative. Policy leaders will demand data to back up their work. Product owners for digital platforms will demand that digital experience adapt to what we know about the user, proactively spot fraud and misuse, and ensure that service usage information is collected and used for continuous improvement. Ministers will interact with the data directly for faster decision making at the heart of government. Well, we can hope anyway. Stakeholders outside government will demand more standardised ways of exchanging data with government departments. And citizen groups will be able to hold governments to account more effectively. Second, we need leaders who are thinking about collective benefits. A few years ago, a colleague of mine was working with a number of policing bodies, and each of them was desperate for data from other agencies, but wouldn't countenance sharing any of their own information. And the irony of that was lost on them. Now, of course, there are some clever technology solutions. A while back, my team was involved in setting up an API framework that would allow agencies to not share raw data with each other, but to ask very specific questions, such as, does this person have an NHS record, or is this individual in receipt of benefits? The idea is similar to the eligibility checks work done by the personal data exchange team, if any of you saw that. Well, it's just one technique in a kit bag that we're going to need. And I'm not someone who believes that request response APIs have all the answers either. Sometimes the techniques you need to use require you to have the entire data set to hand. When it comes to leadership and sharing data, we need to find better ways to incentivize the right behaviours. In the Q&A panel in a moment, I'll be joined by my colleague Simon Driscoll, who heads up data consulting for NTT DATA UK. And I'm grateful for his insight on this. The leaders that excel here are going to be those who can walk that fine line between the right data protections and opening up useful data between and within departments. I'm sure that's why the survey respondents wanted greater clarity on what could and couldn't be shared, because they want to share data, but they're just confused about what's allowed. That issue actually came up twice in the survey, and it also mirrors my own personal experience anyway. You see, sometimes the policy is so unapproachable that decision making can function on rumour and hearsay. I found myself visiting the legislation.gov.uk website a few times recently because I got fed up of vague answers or even incorrect answers based on partial information. It's a great resource if you've never visited. So I've now managed to read most of the Data Protection Act 2018, the Land Registration Act 2002, and now I'm cracking on with the Digital Economy Act 2017. They're all crackers. Anyway, I hope that was some food for thought this morning. Now it's back to Vicki for the Q&A. So how's the chat looking, Vicki?
Thank you, Bill. Right, so I'm looking at a small handful of questions that are coming through on the chat. So whilst we go through those, and Bill and Simon, I'm going to put you on the spot in a second and read those out to you. If there's anyone else who wants to ask any three of us any questions, please do add that to the ask the questions function so we can see that pop up on our screens. So in no particular order, first question is, are we planning to share this detail on LinkedIn so attendees can reference it and pass it on? So I'll take that one. Yes, both the survey results will be sent to you, and you should already see some links that have appeared on LinkedIn which will publicise this in a bit more detail. So that is the answer to that question. Second question then is probably one for you to start off with, Simon, which is, what, if anything, can the civil service learn from other industries in terms of how they use or manage data?
Well, thank you, Vicky, and good morning, everyone. Well, I guess the question about the differences between civil service and industry was always going to be an inevitable one. It is actually interesting. However, in this instance, I think there's probably more similarities than differences between the two. If I look out in industry in general, there's plenty of sources of other analysis about the importance of data to businesses in general. You know, the usual kind of Gartner facts, etc. There's a couple of really useful ones I use very, very frequently. There was about 3 years ago, Gartner started to suggest that organizations' physical valuations would be driven by their use of data and what they're doing with data and information. But at the same time, I think there's another statistic from Gartner that something like about 80 to 90% of data science projects fail to get into production and deliver value. So there's still big challenges in industry as well. Could we learn anything from industry? I think I would call out, actually the first thing I'm going to say is, in response to these types of questions, you get the usual kind of Googles, Amazons, Facebooks, Netflixes called out as the usual suspects or the exemplars for putting data to good use and monetizing data. But those organizations started out being data driven. That's what they set out to be from inception. Lessons from other industries. So I would call out probably 2 or 3 what you might call kind of historic or heritage organizations that we'll all be very familiar with in the UK. Go right back to Tesco's. When they launched the club card, I don't think that Tesco believed they were creating a data-driven organisation. I think they were absolutely driven on loyalty and rewarding loyalty. But as a consequence, they've actually become a hugely data-driven organisation, and they do a huge amount now through data and analytics. They've become a data-driven business. If I look at Nationwide Building Society and Marks and Spencer's, 2 well-known brands, they have made conscious and strategic decisions to start investing in data. I think Nationwide started to invest about 4 billion in a transformation which has got AI, machine learning, and more importantly, data democratization at its heart. Marks and Spencer's, I think the chief executive announced, I think it was about 2018, 2019, something like that, that he wanted to create the most data literate leadership team that exists in retail. And they launched a massive investment, their biggest ever investment in people and training people, about 1,000 members of staff that they took through and are still taking through their retail data academy. So I think that actually plays back to a lot of the themes that Bill's just walked through. I think if I take those 3 examples, it is they're making huge strides because they've got senior leaders making strategic decisions and backing that up by investment to make that change happen.
Thanks, Simon. Okay, so next question is probably one for you to take, Bill, which is specifically about the national data strategy. And it says, your survey has brought up the idea of an integrated data platform for government. Do you think this is a good idea and can succeed, or do you think it's too ambitious? Bill.
Okay, good question. So I suppose the first thing to say is, yeah, there's strong support for it in the survey, and actually in the national data strategy, the government has committed itself to building this integrated data platform for government. And if you kind of look at the small amount of information that's presented there, there's a kind of discovery principle around data sets. So this isn't just about the ONS acting as a broker for kind of point-to-point communication between government departments. Now, I don't think necessarily technology is going to be the biggest challenge. I've designed these kind of architectures at a city level, for example. But I think what this will do is start to force the issue on some of the topics that we've been talking about earlier. So things like common standards, policy, legislative frameworks, even the issue of the kind of public interest and public education. But I think also that the this is where the centre will need some levers. One of the things I think that will be useful about this platform is we should start to see some economies of scale over how data is shared in government. And so once you get one set of data sharing, you can kind of build on that much more quickly. So we should start to accelerate. I think one of the challenges might not actually be kind of connecting different government departments, but if you think about the landscape of data within those departments, that could be part of the challenge, right? So let me say what I mean. If you're exchanging some data over a sort of complex API or even a sophisticated data set, there's a good chance that that data will come from a number of different kind of back-end systems within any one department, and that starts to expose that kind of interdepartmental data sharing problem to the range of kind of data silos that exist within departments. So that could be kind of one challenge. And then another one that I perceive is that who kind of fixes the quality of the data? So in some of those data silos and backend systems, some of the data quality isn't great at all. And what happens when the consumer of the data wants something that's higher quality than those publishing it? And I think that's where the incentives will really, the rubber will really hit the road as well. So it'd be an interesting space to watch, Vicki.
Thanks, Bill. OK, so next question is, can you talk to how you are collaborating with GDS? So I can probably take that one, and Bill, Simon, jump in if you want to. Two things to mention there. First is our most recent work with GDS was collaborating on the 2030 technology vision across government. For this audience, the second thing I'll mention is something that is in the offing, and there'll be more released about in the next month or so. But we are working with GDS, ONS and the Cabinet Office on a data challenge campaign, which will be a bit of a civil service wide competition, shall we say, jointly across government that will play out over the summer. So more to come on that. You'll hear more about that in LinkedIn in due course. All right, next question is on data strategies. Were there any standout examples in any government departments? Bill, let's go to you first on that one.
Well, I suppose the survey did kind of indicate this. So if you think about respondents from HMRC, that they tended to suggest that the sort of scale of maturity was better. I didn't do the sort of fine detailed analysis of kind of departments by availability of data strategy. Want to take offline perhaps. But I think we can see in some of the concrete work that's happened on the ground in HMRC and how they're, some way ahead. If you talk to a number of stakeholders around government, there sort of tends to be general agreement in terms of using data to drive the tax system. So I think that's one good example, but also smaller departments as well. So a few months ago, I was working with the Land Registry. Their data strategy is really interesting as well, and they're kind of very positive desire to share data and what's on the register. So I think we don't want to just look at the big departments of state. We can look at things that are happening in even the smaller agencies as well.
Thanks, Bill. Simon, I'm going to come to you next on this question, which is getting access to data skills and developing data skills across the civil service is one of the hardest things that civil servants face. What are your views on how we can best tackle that problem?
Thank you. I think there's probably two questions there, actually, how to get access to the skills and how to develop them. Let me start with the developing one. I think the first thing I would say is that data touches everyone in the organisation. So probably the most important thing, and certainly the thing that I'm seeing industry tackle first, is the subject of data literacy. And by data literacy, we're not talking about training everyone to do the smart, clever analytics and become data scientists. Data literacy is actually really quite a wide topic, including some of those essential skills of how do we educate the wider participants and stakeholders in our organisation around the art of the possible for data, and get them to be asking the right questions in the first place. Because if they're not asking the right questions, we have real difficulty in demonstrating the value that data and analytics can deliver. Then we're not making an impact, and it becomes a virtuous circle of we don't make the right impact, we don't get the right questions. For me, in terms of building up some of that learning, there is a huge wealth of publicly available learning these days. We've got the things as LinkedIn Learning, there's all sorts of YouTube channels, and even TEDx presentations. There is a massive wealth of training. I don't necessarily buy into the fact that you have to have a formalized training program. In terms of accessing data skills, I think the other point around development and access is recognizing that the right data skills do not exist in just one person. Getting real value from data requires a real mix of people and real mix of skills, and therefore a hybrid team. Some of those will be deeply analytical skills. Some of them, as Bill called out from the survey, will be around data governance. Some of them will be about data strategy. Some of them will be about just articulating stories and getting the recipients of data to understand the insights and be able to take action. So I think for me, it's that hybrid team, and then calling in the right skills, which might mean partnering, might mean going to externals, might mean cross-fertilizing skills from across functions or even across departments, so that you're bringing the right people together to really drive the value from data.
Thank you. Bill, coming back to you next. Question is, do you have any recommendations for what the centre should coordinate, fund or build independently? Or do you think small partnerships of departments need to develop?
Okay, interesting question. Maybe I'll try and give a short answer to this, and we could elaborate if there's kind of further time. So I think in some ways the departmental collaboration is kind of a bit of a picture of what we have today. So it's sort of ad hoc partnerships of departments forming, and I think the centre will bring something new. So I think the answer is not necessarily to carry on just with these kind of ad hoc collaborations that might exist today. So I think the centre needs to set firm direction and build a small amount of the technology, but without kind of constraining departments so much that they can't innovate and everything's completely locked down. I think maybe we can learn some lessons from what's gone before in GDS as well, and try and strike that balance between central control and the innovation and capabilities within individual departments.
Thanks, Bill. I'm going to stay with you for the next question, which is, what do you see as the largest barriers for public authorities in sharing and using data inside the current data protection framework?
Okay, I think maybe the original question was about current data protection legislation, and so kind of sticking within the boundaries of what we have today. I suppose the National Data Strategy does point the way to perhaps changing the UK legislation now that we're out of the EU, which is going to be a really interesting space to watch. You see a number of kind of nuanced references to that. I think the biggest challenge within the current legislations for public bodies is sometimes understanding what the public task really means. If we're talking about the Data Protection Act 2018, for example, and what is the definition of that, what's allowed within that and what isn't. And I do see quite a lot of kind of confusion around that issue. I think if there was greater clarity, then the rest of kind of what applies to GDPR is then more of a sort of common ground between departments of state and private sector bodies as well. So I think nailing that particular issue would be pretty useful.
And Simon, is there anything you'd like to add to that point on legislation or the previous point about barriers?
Yeah, I think probably less about the legislation. I think barriers. I think all of those last couple of questions are focused around what's the role of the centre and what should the centre do and not do. And I think there is a bit of a balancing act. I think, as we've seen from the survey, leadership and kind of the centre and some direction from the centre were called out as almost imperatives. I think we also have to watch out for the pitfalls. When I talked about the skills, I talked about data literacy, and I talked about data being everyone's responsibility. You know, we are all actually guilty of both creating data through our normal day-to-day roles, and we're consuming data as well. So we all have a part to play in it. So my fear or the pitfall about swinging the pendulum too far to the centre is we almost paint the impression that somebody in the centre is now taking overall responsibility for data and it becomes their problem. Where actually, as I say, we all have a part to play. And that plays back to that data literacy point I talked about. So getting that balance, I think, is really key.
Thanks, Simon. So there's one more question or point of view, I should say, on the chat. If there is anything else people would like to ask, please do add that. I'm going to read out a point someone's made, which is perhaps you could compare and contrast non-core data companies and this research in your summary. This will potentially widen the audience, especially relevant as we are all collaborating and talking about interoperability. I work across both is the point that's being made. Very valid point, and I think as you would expect, we are expecting to have a lot of follow-up from this survey and be able to cut the data in a number of different ways. So thank you very much for that comment. If there's no other questions, I will pose one final question to you, Bill, which I'm sure everyone will be fascinated to hear, which is, given you have swallowed the book on the Data Protection Act 2018, what was your favourite bit of the Act, Bill?
Oh my goodness. I think what I said is I frequently consult the website so I can confirm the wording of the Act, but the one section I quite often go to, I think it's section 53, which is section 28 of GDPR, which talks about the responsibilities of data processors, and that's because frequently NTT DATA are in that role, and obviously I'm trying to make sure that we comply with all our other responsibilities. And the very last section of the Data Protection Act 2019 says that the Data Protection Act 2019, the name of it can be shortened to the Data Protection Act 2018. So pretty useful information. I'm glad I read that section of the legislation.
Very good. Thank you, Bill. OK, so that brings us to the end of our webinar. Thank you again to everyone for A, responding to the survey, B, listening today, and obviously asking your questions. Up on the screen are our contact details. If there is anything you would like to follow up with us or any questions you want answering, please feel free to contact us directly. Straight after this session, we will send you a copy of the report and the full survey. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Have a great day.